Hey everyone, this is Des, and you are listening to the Wellness Project powered by Spotlight Coalition. On today's episode, I'm talking with Barb Spanjers. She's a therapist and wellness coach. She specializes in disordered eating, emotional eating, body image, getting out of diet culture, and the dark side of seeking wellness. I've had a few people on the show before that have discussed disordered eating and emotional eating, so I'm very excited to hear Barb's perspective. Let's talk to Barb about all things wellness and diet culture. Everyone, I'm here with Barb Spanjers, and she is a therapist and wellness coach. Barb, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. This is going to be fun. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really am excited to talk to you because we are talking about wellness and diet culture and things of that nature.
Mhm.
So I just first want to get into, can you tell us how you got started in this work and why you're so passionate about it?
I spent a period of time in my life as a massage therapist. My background actually had a bachelor's in psychology, but later I was working as a massage therapist at a really big, one of the biggest spa companies in the world. Loved it, loved it, loved it. However, there was just so much misinformation, I would say, about wellness. I felt like it was a very narrow view of wellness, and it just wasn't very evidence based. Things like, they would want to still sell products and to make these claims about them and detoxing. And I would ask questions like, well, how do you know that? And what's the mechanism? And what's the science? And there just was nothing really well explained. I figured it's because really it hadn't been studied, but there just is a lot of misinformation, I think, in the wellness industry. I loved it. So I don't want to totally be like, they suck, everybody has good intentions. The people I worked with were awesome. My clients were beautiful, but there is this part of it that really relies on anecdotes more than science. And that's not necessarily a benign thing. And I also think that wellness, so much of what it is now, when you say that word, it's a very kind of narrow view of health. And now, as a mental health professional, because I later went on to graduate school and became a therapist, we have to look at mental health. There's a lot that people do in the name of health, of physical health, that actually can harm our mental health. Eating disorders is one example of that, but certainly not the only one. So, trying to broaden that view of what wellness really means, and trying to kind of be a bit of a myth buster about a lot of the claims that are out there, because a lot of the things, dieting, and even if you don't call it diet, like an eating plan or lifestyle or whatever, it actually very often ends up making people's world smaller. They don't want to go out with friends because they don't know what's going to be on the menu at the restaurant. I mean, that's just one example. You're trying to have health, but you're actually sacrificing another part of your health for that.
Interesting. That's a really great point. I haven't thought about it that way. So,
Mhm.
can you give some more examples as to how seeking out wellness can actually harm your mental health?
One of the things that pops out to me is I work a lot with clients on emotional eating, and that it has been so demonized. I mean, food is supposed to be emotional, right? From day one, what is feeding an infant? It's breastfeeding, it's holding that child. And even if you're bottle feeding, you're holding that child close, and it's bonding time and it's connection time. And that is tied up with food. And we don't want to take that out of it, And so far too often, I think our view of what eating should be is very much like, it's only fuel. It's like, no, it's not only fuel. It's not just the chemical components in your body. It is our whole culture. Holiday foods are special, family meals are special, dining with friends are special. If you go to, any other countries, what do? You dine with others, right? That's part of the whole experience. And so diet culture and wellness culture kind of creates this big disconnect between the larger function that eating plays in our lives, and it demonizes things that are totally normal. Like, emotions should be a part of eating. And even if we're eating to soothe unpleasant emotions, how is that really such a bad thing in and of itself? If it didn't potentially result in weight gain, would anybody care?
Right. Oh, that's a really great point. I really like your perspective on that because food is a cultural experience. It is an emotional experience. You're absolutely right. That's a really great point about emotional eating because you do always hear these negative things about emotional eating. And I think you're right because it is tied into weight gain, which is demonized a lot in our society.
And as a coping skill, I mean, you're a therapist, people cope in lots of ways. And, as far as that goes, eating is a pretty benign one, right? Because
Right.
they could be drinking, they could be doing drugs, they could be self-harming. And all of those also are ways of coping that have obviously big downsides. And in the scheme of the big picture, eating is just pretty benign. So we can expand our toolbox of coping, and you never have to take eating out of it. When I work with clients, it's about helping them have more choices, but eating is always still an option. This is one of those weird things about, psychology. When you stop demonizing something, it kind of loses its power over you.
Okay, I really appreciate your perspective on that. Can
Mhm.
you explain in general what exactly is diet culture?
Well, Black culture is a web of beliefs that elevates one body type as being most desirable. And sometimes you can say health elevates health as being the be all end all. But really, when you dig into what does health look like, and I kind of put health in quotation marks, it also usually boils down to body type, reshaping your body, losing weight, whatever, getting curvier, whatever. But almost always focused on changing your external body. There's the quote unquote right way to eat. And by the way, how many right ways are there to eat? Because if you go on Instagram, one person's saying don't eat carbs, and the next person's like eat a lot of carbs, and the next person's like only eat animal products, and the next is like never eat animal products. Like there's no
Right.
consensus of what is like the best way to eat. It's really hard to measure nutrition. I mean, you'd have to lock people. Well, I'm just you'd have to lock people up and know exactly what they eat forever, right? A lot of nutrition study is self-report, but the bigger picture is, again, trying to reduce that to like what's the right way ends up creating a lot of stress, because food is also fun, and we should be incorporating some fun foods in with the nutrition.
Absolutely. And I think that it does become very stressful for people. And I think it's very overwhelming. And like you said, there's no consensus. You go on anybody's page or website and there's all different recommendations. So I think it's very hard for people to know what eating healthy looks like.
Right. And when people say, like, is it a healthy food? It's like, I don't know. Take its temperature. Is it healthy? I mean, is it sick? Language is really, really important. So, when people say things like good or bad, or this food is sinful, this is, or this is like guilt-free, that all plays into people's relationship with food and their body to their detriment, really.
You have a perspective I haven't heard about emotional eating, but can you talk about maybe signs or risk factors or symptoms of an eating disorder, how somebody might know that they have a problem with their relationship with food?
Well, I'm going to broaden that out, just relationship with food, not necessarily eating disorder, because there's a whole kind of subclinical field of, I think most of us actually have an eating disorder on some level, or disordered eating, I should say. Our culture kind of promotes it, right? You're being so good. You're only eating, fruit or whatever. Some of the things that I would look for as an individual, like if you are ever feeling guilty about what you eat, that's a sign that your relationship with food is not so healthy, right? Because there's really no place for guilt. I was like, well, did you steal the food? Did you go beat up an old lady? I always think of like Seinfeld. I always watch the Seinfeld reruns, and there's the episode where he goes and beats up a lady for a rye bread. And did you beat up an old lady for that food? Yeah, no need to feel guilty. So that's one piece of it. And if you're feeling constrained, like you're having a hard time socializing, going out with friends, because like I mentioned earlier, you don't know what's going to be on the menu, or you are worried that you're going to eat too much, or you want to, look a certain way, not necessarily look physically, but kind of have that health halo. Like I can only order this thing and I can't, look my healthy part if we're going to go to a pizza place. So if there's anything like that, that is kind of getting in the way of your life, then that is a sign. If there's any certain foods that you can't have in the house, a lot of times people say, well, I can't have chocolate, but if it's not in the house, I don't miss it. It's like, well, what happens when you bring it in the house? And if that's an issue, then that's actually a marker that your relationship with food is a little off.
Yeah, I think that's really good for people to know. So if somebody becomes aware of that and they're listening right now and they resonate with some of what you're saying and they experience that, what is their next step? What do you recommend?
Well, one of my favorite places to start is the book Intuitive Eating. by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. It's kind of the classic. They've got 10 principles, but it's not like a step-by-step kind of thing. Sometimes people try to turn it into another diet, but there's 10 principles that help you organize your relationship with food, including like getting rid of the diet police and it's, working with emotional eating. So that's a great place to start. And I would definitely start with the book or somebody who is actually certified in intuitive eating, because intuitive eating has become more popular in recent years. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's kind of also gotten sucked into diet culture. A lot of people are kind of using the external verbiage of intuitive eating, but really doing it in a place that's coming from diet culture. And so that's kind of like the love yourself thin diet. Like if you do these things, then the weight will release. And it's like, first of all, we don't know, we really don't have much control over our weight, contrary to what, we're generally sold. No matter what, you can't get through a day without, hearing about a diet plan or, this or that, whether it's breakfast TV or whatever.
Can you explain exactly then what intuitive eating is?
Well, intuitive eating is an approach. It was developed by two dietitians, Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribole, and it really helps people come back in touch with their bodies, because diet culture teaches us to ignore our bodies and ignore our hunger and ignore our needs. And so intuitive eating, the word intuitive, is helping us to get back to what we're all born with, helping us to understand our own hunger and fullness cues, getting rid of those ideas of good and bad foods. And it does incorporate nutrition, but they call it gentle nutrition. So it's not like rules that you have to follow. It's, nutrition is a very big picture kind of thing. A day or a week or even a month of vacation eating or whatever is generally not going to harm your health the way people think it will. Much of health is part of our larger culture. So your zip code is actually one of the best predictors of health. And so I think we overemphasize as a country on individual activities, our individual behaviors. And not that those aren't important in some way, but they're kind of oversold.
Okay. And can you explain that? Why is our zip code an indicator of our health?
Well, stigma. A lot of diet culture is rooted in racism. And there's a great book called Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings, which helps explain some of that. But you do hear a lot about like food deserts, how access to food. Okay. And so that's one piece of it, perhaps, but things like access to healthcare and stress and pollution and access to, good education and all of those things feed into our daily lives. It helps explain why, our zip code, basically our socioeconomic status, is a better predictor of health than a lot of our individual behaviors.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so that's something that we have no control over as individuals. It's where you're born. So you have no control over that.
Yeah. And so, and I think that in healthcare and health coaching and everything on Instagram, so much of it gets boiled down to personal responsibility, and people need to broaden that out and just see that this is part of our entire culture and it is an intersection of systems.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
It was just reminding me of, food addiction as a concept and how it's actually not really based in science. People want to look at that as an analogy to help understand their situation with food, and it doesn't necessarily play out that way.
Right. Okay. So I had no idea. So food, because you hear that all the time, food addiction, that's kind of like a buzz phrase. So there's actually no science behind that.
There's really not much. I want to honor that people have these experiences with food that feel intense and they feel out of control and they feel unpleasant. And so, if you hear food addiction, you're like, that's it, that explains it. But when you really dig into the studies, there's very little to back that up as far as food as a substance or sugar as a substance, as a chemical. I would buy more of a process addiction, like shopping, gambling, a little bit. But as far as the studies on sugar addiction, a lot of them are done on animals, and we just can't extrapolate or generalize to adults, adult humans for that. Also, one thing they looked at with the rats, you hear of them being like really obsessed with the sugar. But the fact is, the rats that were obsessed with the sugar were the rats that were only given the sugar intermittently. So they didn't have kind of ongoing access. And that's actually a lot like dieting, right? So, oh, I can't have this food. And then as soon as you go off your diet or you cheat or whatever it is, you just want that food, right? So, a lot of what gets termed as food addiction is looking at behavior that can better be explained by being restricted from food, either psychological or physical restriction with food, like dieting. Or, you think of the kids whose parents are really strict with sugar, and those are the kids that they go to a birthday party, they go to a sleepover, they're the ones digging in the pantry,
Right.
their face, right? And then their parents are like, see, I can't trust them. That's why I limit the sugar. And they're actually, that whole cycle is actually perpetuating itself because it's more about the kids were not given the chance to be around sugar and experience what it's like and get to learn to trust their own bodies around it. And so, of course, when they do have access to it, they're like, yay, give it to me.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. So say
Yeah.
somebody does want to cut out anything like sugar or dairy, but they're having a hard time junk food. They don't like the effects that, junk food has on them. So what would you recommend then as more of an effective way to cut that out rather than restricting? As you said, it will make you want to crave it more.
Well, if you do a blanket thing like, oh, I'm going to cut out dairy or I'm going to cut out all sugar, then that definitely is a form of restriction. A better way to kind of look at it is, through the lens of intuitive eating is not like, oh my gosh, I can't have the sugar, but hey, I've noticed that when I eat sugar at 3 p.m, my attention really crashes and I can't finish my workday. So that's noticing the effect in your body as opposed to saying, oh, sugar's bad, I shouldn't have it. And so it's the come from is much more important in a lot of ways than the actual behavior. If you see yourself as an emotional eater and you're going to have a cookie, it's like, well, are you using that cookie to avoid something unpleasant, or are you using that cookie to take a break, recharge, and then do what you got to do? Right. So either case, ate the cookie, but it's a very different come from. So if people are finding that sugar is, not agreeing with them in the sense of like they've got a lot of ups and downs of their energy, then that's, honoring your body. That's honoring yourself by noticing what works best for you. Diet culture would say, oh yeah, you shouldn't have the sugar. That's bad. And we internalize a lot of those messages. And so sometimes it's pretty tricky trying to tell, oh, am I doing this because of diet culture? Am I doing it because I'm really honoring my own self-care?
Right, absolutely. And I really see diet culture play out. I work in a middle school and high school right now. And before I was working with kids between 5 and 19 years old. And a lot of them would talk to me about diets and limiting their food and things like that. So it does start very young that we are internalizing these messages.
Yes, it's really, really young. I forget the exact age, but very little kids know what they quote unquote should and shouldn't eat. And they've also observed that being fat in our society is like something you don't want to be. Very young, toddlers, even. I don't say toddlers, but very young.
Oh, yes. I saw a video years ago. I can't remember the video exactly, but they showed pictures of overweight children to other little children. And they said, what do you think this person eats? And they said garbage and poop and dirt and things like that.
Yes, internalized so much so we've ascribed such moral value not only to food, but to body size, which is actually largely beyond our control. And the ironic thing about dieting is it tends to be a really good predictor of weight gain over the long term. But I always kind of hesitate to say that because really, truly, it shouldn't even matter what somebody's size is. I'm a very weight inclusive practitioner. And so much of what we see out there is weight stigma. It's in healthcare, it's in education, it's kind of everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of teachers out there that are kind of teaching kids to have disordered eating. I mean, they're not intending to, but right, if you're making a math problem or a reading comprehension and it's about something that has to do with diet culture because it's so embedded and we don't even notice that we're swimming in diet culture, little kids are picking that up from day one.
And do you have any tips or advice at all for individuals or ideas for our society as a whole to be more weight inclusive?
I think on an individual basis, I think for us to always be stepping back and saying, what am I feeling when we are having feelings of judgment towards somebody else?
I always notice, watching TV shows and movies that the funny best friend is always very overweight. And when the main character is overweight, it's always kind of like a punchline and brought up that they're overweight or it's their journey to being beautiful and skinnier, so it's always in media.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing about, the weight loss journey and when you get there, you'll have everything perfect, right? And that diet culture, the whole industry, which is like over $70 billion a year, really sells that myth that when you lose weight, you're going to get that better job, you're going to have that better romance, you're going to, be loved, you're going to be worthy. It just keeps people stuck and it just keeps people in a place of real judgment. It's really, really sad, I think. Makes me angry. It's really so entrenched that it's hard for us to see it. And not until you start pulling those things out, like you said, like, oh, I've observed that the only fat person can be the best friend who's funny. Why can't that person be the lead?
without their weight being mentioned. Yeah. Because
Right.
when they are, their weight is always mentioned.
Yeah.
Is there any way at all that individuals can begin to unlearn these internalized messages, unlearn these behaviors? And is there any way that people can move forward from that?
If you look at health at every size, that is a philosophy that helps to disentangle the belief that health and weight are causally related. I mean, they are associated, but there's really no cause and effect. And so that is a great community to get started with. There are some Facebook groups. There's so it's the ASDA website. I forget what that exactly stands for, but we can put it
Okay.
in the show notes if you want.
Yeah. Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, just realizing that people come in all sizes and there is no limit to like that kind of acceptance. Like when people are like, oh, yeah, well, as long as they're healthy, it's like that doesn't even matter. Like everybody is worthy of respect and care, no matter what their weight, no matter what their health status is.
Right. And I mean, somebody else's weight or even their health is, none of our business.
Correct.
That's their own business. And if they care about it or not, that's who are we to say?
Right. And right. You are not a more moral person if you are striving to, improve health.
Right.
You're just not. I mean, it is a thing. And if you choose to try to do some things to improve your own health, that's cool, but it doesn't make you a better person or a worse person.
And I think a lot of people do put a lot of maybe their own value or their own worth on, how many times they go to the gym a week or what they eat or the marathons that they run. I think that people get a lot of self-worth from those things and don't realize they are worthy without having to go to the gym, without doing the marathons. And I think people do measure their worth by those activities.
Absolutely. If you love running marathons, then that's totally cool. But if you are running a marathon because you're fitting into like, oh, this is what a quote unquote healthy person should do, that's a different issue. What kind of activities would you do if it weren't coming from diet culture? Like, what do you like to do, even if it doesn't, maybe burn off as much fat or whatever? And it doesn't always have to be anything really slow either. And sometimes people think that, oh, if you're going to be mindful about your movement, that means only ever doing yoga or slow walks on the beach. It's like, no, if you like to box and that's what you love to do, then that's fine. And again, it's the come from. Are you doing that activity because you like it? Or are you doing that activity because it's serving some sort of view of yourself as a certain type of person? Or you're doing it because you think you should for your, specifically for your health or to lose weight?
Right, absolutely. And what would you say to maybe family members that have somebody that they're really worried about? They have really high cholesterol or they have heart problems, things like that.
Again, weight and health have been conflated. Weight in and of itself, weight is not a behavior and we can't control it. So if you want to help people to focus on activities that might help them lower cholesterol, then that's cool. But if they don't want to, like, you also can't force them. I guess the main thing is to remove the judgment from our family members. I know a lot of times that comes from worry, but just understanding that our personal actions as far as health goes can only go so far. They just are not, they're just not the whole story. And so just to lighten up and to engage with your family member and, let them know that you love and accept them no matter what, and to not put that judgment on them. I mean, that's really probably the best thing and the kindest thing and the most caring thing that you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say to those people that are feeling judged by their friends or family or loved ones for their health or their weight, the lifestyle they choose, or, they love eating cake every night and their families judge them for that. What would you say to those people that are feeling judged for their choices?
Well, it's like so many things when we deal with families, right? You can't control what other people do. And I mean, you can share your feelings with and ask them to refrain from that. And if they won't, then sometimes you have to set a boundary. And sometimes that can mean not dining with certain family members for a period of time. I mean, it's just whatever is going to work within your family, but understand that, whether it's coming from a quote unquote good place or not with your family member, sometimes that doesn't matter, because even if someone's well intended and they're always telling you lay off the cake, that gets very wearing on you, right? That is something that's hard to hear, and it just kind of drags down your soul. So I would say people just need to set whatever boundaries they need to set.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really great tip. Well, Barb, this was really great. Do you have any last words of advice or wisdom for our listeners? Anything you feel like they should know?
Understand that so much of what's out there is not necessarily based in science, and it's not very affirming of us as individuals and as people that are just worthy of just being ourselves. You don't need to be a different size. You don't need to eat a certain way to be, a worthwhile person.
Great. Thank you for that. And can you tell everyone where they can find you?
You can find me at barbaraspanjers.com.
Great. And I will put that in the show notes. And you had something else coming out as well. Is that right?
Oh, coming up pretty soon. I'm creating a self-study workshop for emotional eating, and that will be on my website, and people can download that when it's ready, and they'll be able to work through some of the issues that we were just talking about with emotional eating and diet culture and all that stuff.
Perfect. Everyone, that will be in the show notes. So make sure you go and check out Barb. Barb, thank you so much.
You are welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much, Barb, for coming on and talking with me about this topic. It's a very important one. And every time I speak with a guest about this topic, I'm always learning new things. So I really appreciated Barb's perspective, and I hope you learned a lot as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you would like to follow Barb, please check the show notes on where to find her at accordingtodez.com/65. Again, that's accordingtodez.com/the numbers 65. All right, I will talk to you next week. Have a great week.